The string quartet played softly in the glass-walled ballroom of the Pacific View Hotel, overlooking the glittering harbor of Vancouver. My father's retirement celebration was in full swing. After 38 years at West Coast Capital Bank, he was stepping down as senior vice president, and the city's financial elite had gathered to toast him. I stood near the balcony doors, swirling a glass of ginger ale, watching the warm summer light fade over the water. Across the room, my older sister, Margaret, worked the crowd in her custom emerald gown. She'd followed in Dad's footsteps, rising quickly through the bank's investment division. I had chosen a very different route. Financial technology startups, one my family never truly respected. The contrast was stark, her couture sparkle and flawless blowout versus my sleek navy jumpsuit from a small local designer. I could practically hear my mother's internal calculations as she approached, draped in a pearl-trimmed Dior jacket. "Elaine, darling," she said, air kissing me, "you made it, though perhaps something more formal would have been better." "I came straight from work," I replied, admitting that work meant closing a round of funding that valued my company at $2,100,000,000. In their minds, I was still tinkering with code in a cramped co-working space, chasing a fading Silicon Valley fantasy. Margaret floated over, champagne in hand, her Cartier watch catching the chandelier light. "Still running that little app of yours?" she asked, voice dripping with practiced condescension. "What is it again, some niche payment tool?" I smiled. If only she knew that her bank's entire mobile transaction network now ran on my company's infrastructure, that every record-break quarter she bragged about was powered by my servers. "Something like that," I said, glancing at my phone. 14 minutes until the press release dropped. Margaret sipped her champagne. "Well, Dad's retirement package includes a hefty stock grant, and with the share price at an all-time high," she let the sentence trail off, her smirk implying the obvious. This was what success looked like. I bit my tongue. They'd know soon enough, because when the market opened Monday, their record-high stock would spike again, driven by the announcement that West Coast Capital Bank had officially entered a 10-year, $480 million partnership with my company. And suddenly, my pipe dream would be the backbone of their empire. My phone buzzed, a message from my CFO. "Everything set, board approval confirmed, ready on your signal." "Elaine, sweetheart." My father joined our small circle, cheeks flushed with champagne and applause. "You know, you could still come work with us. Margaret could use a strong technical mind in her division. It's never too late to get on the right path." The right path. That's what they called it when I graduated top of my class from the University of Toronto with a computer science degree, and they tried to funnel me into a junior analyst role at the bank. The safe choice. The family choice. Instead, I'd taken my modest trust fund, the smallest share between the 3 siblings, and poured it into building a payment processing system the big banks claimed was too ambitious to succeed. "Actually, Dad," I began, but my words were swallowed by a chorus of buzzing and chiming from every corner of the ballroom. Guests reached for their phones, brows furrowing. Margaret frowned at her screen. "The bank's app isn't working." Her perfectly manicured nails tapped faster. "Mine's down too," someone said. Another voice. "I can't access my account." The celebratory air fractured, replaced by ripples of unease. Conversations turned into urgent huddles. The clinking of champagne flutes gave way to rapid typing and hushed calls. "Must be a system-wide outage," Margaret declared, trying to sound in control. She adjusted her diamond bracelet. "I'll get IT on the line." She froze, mid-dial. No signal. "It's not an outage," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of water. "The systems are temporarily suspended for the ownership transition." My father blinked. "Ownership transition? That's absurd. West Coast Capital isn't being acquired. We would know if—" Before he could finish, the ballroom's 2 massive projection screens, meant to display a slideshow of his career highlights, flickered. The tribute vanished, replaced by bold red breaking news graphics. West Coast Capital Bank acquired by Horizon Pay in historic $62 billion deal. And beneath that headline, a photo of me shaking hands with Horizon Pay's CEO at a press conference just hours earlier. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the harbor outside. I met Margaret's stunned gaze. That little payment app you love to mock? It just bought the bank. Margaret's flawless composure cracked, her hand tightening around her diamond-studded clutch. My father's celebratory flush faded into a pallor as he stared at the glowing headlines on the screens. Horizon Pay, he said hoarsely. That's impossible. They're just a tech startup. They couldn't possibly. His voice trailed off as the financial news anchors declared it the tech acquisition of the decade. My mother's well-rehearsed social smile had frozen in place. Elaine, darling, she said slowly, isn't that the company you've been consulting for? Perhaps you know something about this? Before I could reply, Mr. Bennett, the bank's CEO, pushed his way through the crowd, his silk pocket square askew. Margaret, what in God's name is happening? The board never approved this. His tone carried the edge of panic. I don't know, sir, Margaret stammered, her confident tone gone. This must be some kind of mistake. Our stock was rated a strong buy just yesterday. Actually, I said, my voice steady, the board approved the acquisition 20 minutes ago. Unanimous vote. The contracts are signed. Every head in the circle snapped toward me. 3 years ago, that weight would have crushed me. Tonight it was almost intoxicating. Margaret's voice wavered. How would you even know that? I pulled out my phone, the only one still working in the room, and opened an email from my CFO. Because I was on the call, right before I came here. My father's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. Elaine, what are you saying? I'm saying, I replied, adjusting the belt of my navy jumpsuit, the same one I'd worn when I signed the preliminary deal last week, that Horizon Pay isn't just a startup anymore. We've been preparing for this for months, and your board loved our technology integration plan. Margaret gave a short, brittle laugh. You expect us to believe your little payment app? The little payment app processed $2.3 trillion in transactions last year. I cut in. Figures you'd know if you'd read the reports I sent to the bank's tech committee. The same committee that swore your legacy systems were good enough. The screen switched to Horizon Pay's corporate profile, my headshot prominent beside the title, founder and CEO. Mother's voice trembled. But the money, how? Remember that worthless blockchain patent Dad said I was wasting my time on in university? I said, smiling. Google offered $60 million for it. I decided to build something bigger instead. The only sound was the harbor wind against the glass. I let the silence stretch, the harbor lights flickering behind me, and if you think tonight's twist was shocking, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because this story is just getting started. I turned them down, I said evenly. Built it myself instead. Mr. Bennett, the bank CEO, pushed forward again, his face now an alarming shade of red. This is outrageous. I'll fight this in court. You can't just... Actually, we can, and we did. I tapped my phone, pulling up an email. Your signature is right here, along with the rest of the boards. The integration begins Monday. The room erupted. Banking executives who had avoided me all evening suddenly found reasons to be near. My phone buzzed again, this time with breaking news alerts about West Coast Capital's stock price soaring on the acquisition announcement. Hey, my father's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him, really looked, seeing not the powerful banker, but a man who had never believed his daughter's warnings. Would you have listened? When I flagged the security flaws last year, Margaret said I was just jealous of her title. Marguerite flinched. Oh, don't worry, sister dear, I said, my voice soft but sharp. You'll keep your job, though you might want to add experience with modern payment systems to your resume. You're going to need it. The next hour at the Pacific View Hotel was chaos. The retirement gala had morphed into a frantic shareholders meeting. Board members huddled in corners, making urgent calls to brokers. The untouched seafood buffet stood like a monument to abandoned plans. I moved through it all, calm in the storm I'd been engineering for 3 years. Senior executives who once dismissed me were now lining up to offer business cards. Even the waitstaff seemed to sense the shift. My glass was refilled before anyone else's. "Mrs. Clark?" a young man in a navy suit said nervously. "I'm with the technology integration team. Your blockchain architecture is brilliant. I've followed your patents for years." "Thank you," I said, recognizing him as one of the few who had supported my proposals before. "Stop by my office next week. We'll need people who understand both sides of this merger." His eyes lit up, but before he could say more, Margaret appeared, her hair slightly mussed, her confidence gone. She grabbed my elbow. "We need to talk," she hissed. I let her lead me to a quiet corner, noting how the crowd parted for us. Amazing how fast the air shifts when power changes hands. "What's your game, Elaine?" she demanded, her voice low and tight. "Is this some kind of revenge?" Margaret's voice was low, sharp. "Because if you think you can just walk in and dismantle everything Dad built—" "You mean," I cut in evenly, "everything you expected to inherit? The bank isn't being dismantled, Margaret. It's being modernized. Something I told you was necessary 2 years ago." Her cheeks flushed. "That was different. You were just consulting back then." "No," I said, holding her gaze. "I was the CEO of a company, trying to prevent a massive security breach. But you and the board were too busy celebrating record profits to listen." I pulled up a document on my phone and held it out. "Remember the security audit from last year? The one you called fear-mongering?" Margaret scanned the file, her expression draining of color. "These vulnerabilities? They're still here?" "At least timid. Most of them," I replied. "Though we've already patched the critical ones during the preliminary integration." "You're welcome. That ransomware attempt last month? It would have worked if we hadn't quietly upgraded your firewall protocols." She leaned back against the wall, her perfect posture collapsing. "Dad's going to kill me. I told him our systems were secure." "Dad's not going to kill anyone," I said softly. "But he may need to rethink his retirement timing." I spotted him across the room, alone at what had been the head table. His champagne sat untouched. Mom was nowhere in sight, likely regrouping in the powder room. The sight of him looking suddenly older made my chest tighten. "Look," I said, lowering my voice. "This isn't revenge. The bank needs this merger to survive the next decade. You know that, even if you won't say it out loud." "And you expect me to just step aside?" she asked bitterly. "Actually," I said, "I want you right where you are. You know the traditional banking side better than anyone. We'll need that expertise. Though you might want to start some coding classes." Before she could answer, a stir at the entrance caught our attention. Mom had reappeared, and she wasn't alone. She was leading a slightly bewildered man in an ill-fitting navy suit. "Tell them," she urged, her voice carrying, "tell them what you told me about Elaine's project." Mr. Fisher, my high school programming teacher, cleared his throat. "I was just explaining the coding competition Elaine won in grade 12. The one that earned her the MIT scholarship. The one you called a waste of time," I said gently to Mom, "because it wasn't a proper extracurricular for university applications." My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. "I didn't understand," she said quietly. "I still don't fully understand all this technology. But Mr. Fisher says your system, it's revolutionizing how money moves." "Something like that," I replied, glancing over as my father slowly approached our growing family circle. "Elaine," he said, his voice rough. "The board chairman just called me. He said they've been quietly courting Horizon Pay for months. Said you're the reason the bank's stock hasn't tanked from all the tech sector competition." I nodded. The acquisition talks began after we saved 3 regional banks from collapse. They were all running our emergency protocols by then, quietly. No one wanted to admit they needed help from the startup. Dad ran a hand through his silver hair. "All those times you asked to meet with me about upgrading our systems were attempts to save you from exactly what was happening in the industry," I finished for him. "But you were convinced traditional banking was untouchable. And now," Margaret said flatly, "you own the bank." "No," I corrected, meeting her gaze. Now we've merged with the bank. There's a difference, one that matters to the thousands of employees wondering about their jobs right now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another alert. The large screens around the ballroom refreshed with the latest headline. Horizon Pay West Coast, Capital Merger Promises. No layoffs, focus on technology aggregation. The air shifted almost instantly. Stiff shoulders loosened. Whispers turned from worry to cautious optimism. There's something else you should know, I said, turning to my family. Dad's retirement party? It's still happening, just with a small update. I gave a nod to the event coordinator who had been waiting at the edge of the room. The screens changed again, now showing a split image. My father's official retirement portrait beside the announcement of his new role, Senior Advisory Board Member for the merged entity. If you want it, I added quickly, catching his stunned expression. The board believes having you involved in the transition will boost customer confidence, and I could use your experience. For a long moment, Dad just stared at the screens. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Advisory board, huh? Does this mean I still get to keep my corner office? Actually, I grinned, we're moving to a new building, corner offices for everyone, with better coffee machines. The tension broke. Margaret laughed. Actually laughed. Mom dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and Dad pulled me into a hug that was tighter than I expected. I'm sorry, he murmured, for not believing in you. It's okay, I whispered back. You can make it up to me by helping explain blockchain to the shareholders. As if to punctuate the moment, every phone in the room chimed in unison. The banking apps were live again, now featuring a refreshed interface that merged West Coast Capital's classic crest with Horizon Pay's sleek, modern logo. The future of banking had arrived, and this time, no one could ignore it. I stepped back and raised my voice. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we were in the middle of celebrating something. I gestured to the waiters, who began circulating with trays of fresh champagne. To Dad's retirement? And to new beginnings. The room erupted in applause, but this time it felt different. Instead of clinging to an old era, people were leaning into the promise of what came next, bridging tradition and innovation, old money and new technology. From my vantage point near the balcony, I watched my father being congratulated by a mix of seasoned bankers and tech founders. In that moment, I realized something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's showing them a better way forward, even if it means crashing a retirement party to do it. And this was just the beginning. But if you've followed me through this journey, you know it wasn't luck. It was persistence, vision, and refusing to let other people's limits define me. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Leave your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if my story lit a spark in you, subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Remember, your ideas, no matter how underestimated, can change the game. Trust your instincts, take risks others fear, and build what you believe in, even if you have to crash a few retirement parties along the way.